We all know Fromsoftware likes to reuse concepts and assets, be it for intentional callbacks or to save development times on some things. But there's a few things that Fromsoft bringing back have become an actual tradition, to the point where going into the new Fromsoft game, we're all expecting and looking for them. But that begs the question, which of these Fromsoft staples have been around the longest? Upon looking to the modern games, there's at least 3 things that I feel have become tradition. The Chaos Blade, a katana that drains your HP upon hitting your opponent, the Moonlight Greatsword, a blue-green blade that shoots projectiles, and good old Patches, a trickster who has fooled many a Fromsoft player for nearly 2 decades. Today we're going through all the Fromsoft games to see which one of these is the longest running callback. And yes, we are going to go all the way into the deep, dark annals of Fromsoft ancient history, the 90s, and go into the games before the Soul series, but we'll be covering those towards the end. We'll begin with the games we're undoubtedly all more familiar with, starting with Demon Souls. Going through the order presented, the first incarnation of the Chaos Blade to look at goes by a different name. It's called Hiltless in Demon Souls, as the lack of the hilt is implied to be the reason for the self-injury while attacking. As you can see though, it's identical to what later would be the Chaos Blade, so it's an undisputable tick for the counter. And by the way, no, we're not discussing the remasters, remakes, re-releases of these games as a second instance. The Moonlight Greatsword in this game is called the Large Sword of Moonlight, as in this one, this class of weapon is referred to as large swords, rather than great swords. Funnily enough, however, this is the only game we're gonna cover where the sword doesn't shoot a magic beam. Its special feature instead is going fully through shields with every swing. I guess slight spoilers, but we're gonna see later that even the earliest incarnations of the Moonlight Sword did shoot beams. So who knows, maybe they thought it would be too strong if you could have access to range attacks with a melee weapon outside of Storm King's arena. Maybe they couldn't get the programming down on it quite yet, or maybe they just didn't have enough time to implement it. Nonetheless, despite the lack of the beam, it's undeniable it's still a throwback to the Moonlight Sword through and through. Lastly for Demon Souls, we of course got Patches, where he is dubbed the Hyena. This is the first incarnation of him with his character design as we know it today, with the bald head and all that. This is also the first game where he does the now classic kicking off a ledge thing, so you got this game to thank for all the hijinks he gets off to in terms of that later on. He does do other things here, don't get me wrong, but if there's anything he's known for in this series, it's kicking you off. So even less to argue with this than the last 2. All the staples are even at 1. Going into Dark Souls 1, now we have the katana named the Chaos Blade, a weapon tied with the Witches of Izalith. Of course it drains your HP upon hitting an enemy, as you'd expect. Since the humanity mechanic was dropped after this game, this is the only variant that scales with humanity, alongside dexterity. The Moonlight Greatsword finally has its name as most people know it by, as Greatswords is the name that this class of weapon goes by from this point forward, for, well, greatswords and two-handers and the like. And finally we get the almighty magic projectile, so we can definitively say we're so back. And for Patches, or Trusty Patches as he goes by in this one, well, yeah, he's here. There's genuinely not much to say about him that's new or different than what you'd expect. So once again, an even board. Now Dark Souls 2 is where things get a little bit interesting. Not for the first 2 mind you, both the Chaos Blade and the Moonlight Greatsword are here with nothing new to report. I guess I could mention that there's a fake Moonlight Greatsword, but I don't think it warrants counting it twice or anything. Patches is where things get interesting, because for his third incarnation of the Soul series, he's not here, but there's an NPC that's named Pate that sort of acts as the antithesis of a Patches character. In your likely first encounter with him, instead of trying to lure you into a trap, he warns you of an upcoming trap. And there's no twist to it. It does turn out to be a trap, and there wasn't a hidden motive behind the warning. So it's clear that this is the Dark Souls 2 team clearly calling back to Patches, but deciding to turn the character on its head and doing more with him. Given there's another version of the Crestfallen Warrior in DS2, like there is in Dark Souls 1, and even Demon Souls, it's clear that they don't mind just ripping a character nearly 1-to-1. So I personally count him for sure. You can let me know if you disagree in the comments. Now for good old Bloodborne. Right away the Chaos Blade is a little bit of a curveball, because there's only a singular katana in this game, the Chikage. It is bleed based, although pretty much all katanas in Fromsoft games at least cause bleed. But most importantly, it does drain your HP, but not on any given hit like the Chaos Blade. It's only on the transformed R2. So as you can see, there's some of the essence of the Chaos Blade, but it's not as straightforward. I think the red cloth you see on the hilt does sway me more towards counting it, since there's something similar in the Chaos Blade, but it's definitely the most uncertain one so far, if I believe it's a conscious callback, but with a twist. Once again, do let me know what you think in the comments if you'd like. The Holy Moonlight Sword wasn't introduced until the DLC, but it's here, and better than ever, because it received a major role in the story of this game by being wielded by a major boss, Ludwig, where in previous games, it is alluded to being special and powerful, but has never been part of the main narrative, and certainly never had as big of an emphasis in the rest of the Soulsborne games. Once you wield it yourself, it is a bit different in that it's a transforming weapon, but it still has the magic beam, and even more so than that, it has an additional attack that's inspired by one of the attacks Ludwig does himself, so undoubtedly we all agree this one counts. Patches is also a bit different in this game, fitting the nature of Bloodborne being a bit different in the Souls games, and that he's literally just a spider. He still has the same name, acts the exact same, and even has a ledge kiki moment, so it's mostly just a superficial difference. Even then, he still has the same dumb face and everything, so I doubt people would mind me counting this one. Dark Souls 3 is a little bit back to the status quo. We get the Chaos Blade, the Moonlight Greatsword is back and just the same as the other Dark Souls, and Patches is here too as usual. But the one interesting detail is that he actually shows up not only in the base game, but also in the DLC. Now there could be a case for this being the exact same Patches as the base game, but I don't really think that's the case. I've always read it as this being another one, I guess. Just in the same way that Dark Souls 1 could be another Patches in another era or something, and Ring City is implied to take place eons after Dark Souls 3. We generally don't see characters live through eras like this, even if they're theoretically immortal if they don't go hollow. And I should mention that you can kill him in the base game, he'll disappear, but even if you have killed him there, he'll return in the DLC. So, it's convoluted any way you look at it. My main struggle is if I should count this as only one appearance or two. And I think I'm leaning on two. Because if the Bloodborne DLC can introduce something that was lacking in the base game, or otherwise it'd be nothing, I think it'd also be fair to count a second appearance of Patches in an expansion. This is also not to mention that the whole lap angle is also unique enough, with its own story and twist. If it was definitely the same Patches, I might be singing a different tune, but this is my conclusion. So for the first time in the video, one of the three is ahead. But onto a true curveball, Sekiro. Now there's no switching of weapons in this game in the same way as the previous ones, as Sekiro isn't an RPG, so it does complicate things. You could look to the Mortal Blade as a Chaos Blade parallel, but the only thing they really have in common is that it's red? You can make an argument for red katanas being another set of callbacks, just like the one in the next game, but this is certainly more recent. Maybe we can revisit this one. Remind me in another 10 to 15 years. There's no weapon you can wield that could be a placeholder for the Moonlight Greatsword, which would certainly not fit this game as is, but there has been arguments made for the Divine Dragon's sword being the stand-in. It is a blue-green sword that shoots projectiles, just wind-based instead of magic. I'm extremely hesitant, mostly due to the fact that you can't wield it yourself, which is always the case besides this instance, and that the design of the sword is wildly different. But we'll see later that they do make efforts to fit the sword into the setting, so I think I will reluctantly count it. But let it be known, this is the one I was most torn with for the entire video. Another one cutting a fine line. There's no character named Patches in this game, but there's a pretty dang close parallel with Anayama. He has similar characteristics in that he's a corpse robber and thief that later says he's reformed, and becomes a vendor of sorts. Obviously he's not named Patches directly, but the first bit of his name, Ana, means hole or opening, something that could be covered by... He also straight up has an eye patch, so they're pretty much everything but beat around the bush that this is Patches. So yeah, that's counted. But onto the big boy, Elden Ring. Unfortunately, there's not really a strong candidate for Chaos Blade. Rivers of Blood might be similar in design to the Chikage, but definitely not to the Chaos Blade, nor does it have any HP drain aspect to it. There is the Bloody Slash Ash of War that you could put in a katana that does drain HP, but it can be put into other sword types as well, so no real point for Chaos Blade in this one for me. As for the other two, we're safe. The Darkmoon Greatsword is very clearly this game's Moonlight Greatsword. The only difference is that it also has an ice element to it, to fit with the characters it's associated with. Although fun fact if you didn't know, in the 1.0 version of the game, it doesn't have this ice aspect. It's basically just a Moonlight Sword, and even looks different in the post-release version. It's a lot more, I guess, faithful to the design we're used to. And Patches is here, and just the same as before. No room for argument there. Now that's it for what would be considered the modern Fromsoftware, but there are two other titles that were put out in the same time frame that I want to give a particular spotlight for. Armored Core 6 and Déraciné. Now I'll be clear and say that I haven't played either of these games, or any of the games for the remainder of the video. Instead I did a few hours worth of research for all the titles going forward. Starting backwards this time, Armored Core 6 didn't seem to have the equivalent to the Chaos Blade, as far as I could tell, and so be it. It doesn't necessarily fit this type of game, although I'm sure no one would have complained about a Metal Gear Rising-ass giant robotic katana in a mech game. There also does seem to be a clear parallel to patches in this game. There's a few candidates from discussions I found online, but given the first patches appeared in an Armored Core game, we'll discuss that very soon, they certainly could have included one by name in this game if they really wanted to, so I'm excluding it. The good news? The Moonlight Sword is here. It is simply called Moonlight, and it works as you'd expect, with a long-range beam attack, which are more like lasers in this game to fit it better, so we're not completely due for one of those callbacks in this game. Now unfortunately for Déraciné, I couldn't even find a single reference to any of the three staples when looking online, which again, perhaps doesn't fit the game, but there is a game we're going to look at later that has a cameo and just a trading card. So they could have found a fun, creative way to allude to it, but alas. Now to delve in the aforementioned dark annals of history that is Fromsoft pre-Demon Souls. Because there's a lot of games, we're going to break it down per staple for these, and only talk about the ones where they appear. Which brings me to the sad news that the Chaos Blade is pretty much out of the race. I did look a bit, and it seems like the Chaos Blade trope was more or less introduced in Demon Souls. So it's a semi-classic in the Soulsborne games, but it seems to only be a Soulsborne game staple. I mean, it wasn't even in Elden Ring, and even Bloodborne was debatable. Now again, I haven't played any of these games going forward, so there could be something I didn't know about. I'm willing to hear a surprise, but even if it showed in a game or two, I don't think it would change the outcome. Let's take a look at patches first, since I mentioned his first appearance a moment ago. In the game Armored Core 4 Answer in 2008, there's a character named Patches the Good Luck, which I don't think you see outside of his mech, but if you see some of his dialogue in the game, it'll seem very familiar.
Wait, I give up! Hey, I'm just following orders here. If he's pulled out, why should I? You guys, you're still alive, right? This is no count, come in! We're allies, right? Right?
There's not a ton to his character as far as I can tell, but it's not hard to see that at least elements of this character were taken for what will become the modern incarnation of him. Now I did say that was his first appearance by name, and there actually isn't any between for Answer and Demon Souls, so that'd be it, right? Well, not exactly. There might be one more. While doing research for this, I came across this video that showcased that there might have been a character that has a, quite frankly, uncanny similarity to Patches in the game Shadow Tower Abyss in 2003. I won't go into depth here, I would just recommend you watch the video if you're interested, but I was 100% sold, even though I went in with some skepticism. Now for full disclosure, I should mention that this game hasn't been officially translated to English, it is Japanese only, but there is a fan-made English patch, and that's what you see here. Because of this, there could be some reasonable doubt that the translator is taking creative liberties. The patch was released after Demons and Dark Souls, but it is advertised as a simple translation, so I'm definitely leaning on counting this as effectively a proto-patches. I'm guessing perhaps one of the devs at Fromsoft remembered or came across this character and just thought it would be a fun idea to include it in Demon Souls, and throw it into the patch's character name. Finally for the Moonlight Sword, let's start at the beginning of humankind, 1994. With the original Kingsfield, Fromsoft's first game, and yes, it did include the Moonlight Sword. Oh boy. In this game, you first find this sword under the name Dragon Sword, seemingly in a sleeping state, then you have to give it to an NPC to transform it into the Moonlight Sword. As alluded to earlier, this sword does actually have projectile attacks as early as this, although you have to be a certain magic stat level to be able to shoot them. In Kingsfield 2, you get it during the final boss. Spoilers, I guess. Same as the first one, you got to be a certain level to be able to use the beams. In Kingsfield 3, the process is more complicated, but it does also exist there. There's even an upgraded version of it. In Armored Core 1 in 1997, it exists as well, and it goes under the name LS99 Moonlight. And I think you're starting to get the idea. Not only have we already beaten Patches' number of appearances, the fact that it shows up as early as FromSoft's earliest games, and you can see it's gonna show up in even its separate franchises this early on, should say everything there is to say. I did research pretty much everything in FromSoft's catalog, even fucking Adventure of Cookie and Cream, and here's a list of all the instances where the Moonlight Sword was featured in one way or another. No, it wasn't in the Cookie and Cream game. Earlier I mentioned a trading card cameo, that comes from Echo Knight. As for the two games that Patches appeared in that were just mentioned, the Moonlight Sword wasn't in Shadow Tower Abyss, it seems, but it was in Armored Core 4 Answer. There are a lot of games that didn't show up in. Some are more predictable than others. For instance, Monster Hunter Diaries or Mobile Suit Gundam Unicorn being established IPs by bigger companies. But there was some that were surprising, like 3D Dot Game Heroes, a game that Fromsoft didn't make, but they were the publishers for in Japan. So my guess is that the devs threw it in as a shout out or a thank you to Fromsoft. I mean, you get it during the quest called Game Design and from the Mech Design Man in From Cave. A cave with a bunch of other Demon Souls memes. So yeah, they were giving someone their flowers. But at a final count of 40, I would undoubtedly say that the Moonlight Sword, as it's known in Kingsfield, is the true Fromsoftware staple. I think if I had to compare it to something, the Moonlight Sword is like The Legend of Zelda's Master Sword, something that is a major part of the series. Sure, it's not in every single game, just like the Master Sword, but it's still seen everywhere. That put Patches more in line with Impa from Zelda, a somewhat frequent reoccurring character, but by no means seen in the same frequency. The fun part of this video, even for me, is that if you're like me, in that you've only played what people associate with FromSoft these days, the Souls games, Bloodborne, Sekiro, Elden Ring, you may have been under the impression that at least the Moonlight Sword and Patches would have been a little more neck and neck, but that's decisively not the case. The Moonlight Sword reigns supreme. Take that, Patches, you little And yeah, that's all for the video. I hope you enjoyed it and you had fun and learned something new as I did. There's definitely a lot of tedious research into, hey, is the Moonlight Sword in Evergrace or Otogi Myth of Demons, etc, etc. Just constantly doing that for a couple hours, so I hope you appreciated it. A lot of them ended up me just going to the wiki and seeing if it exists, but a lot of these games didn't have a wiki, so it was definitely just a matter of me trying to find the right source of someone seeing it or mentioning it or showing it. And for the most part, if I saw it by name in a screen cap or a video, I pretty much included it. There's only one or two that I'm not 100% sure because I didn't see the name of it in then like an equipment menu, but it did seem to be the case. I don't think I would have gone that far into looking at game footage if I didn't think it was there. But yeah, I've enjoyed those. This is sort of a follow-up into the callback series I have, where I looked at all the callbacks that Elden Ring and Shadow of the Erdtree did to the previous games before that. So there's a whole playlist of that. That's a pretty much finished series. I'm considering making a full compilated video of all of this together where I also include things that I might have missed during the videos and people commented. Or maybe correct some mistakes, who knows, for later in the year. But here these are if you would be interested in watching those. If you think you like my dumb voice and would like to see more videos from me in the future, do consider subscribing as well. And if you have a couple bucks to spare and you would like to support me, you can either become a member like all these fine fellow right here, or you can do one of those super chat things. Either are appreciated. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again. Bye bye.